Predict, pick, and prevail in your fantasy football leagues with Nick Giacobbe and Nick Cap. From breakouts to busts, superstars to sleepers, these are the guys that will help you achieve fantasy glory. This is the PrimeTime Fantasy Podcast.
Welcome, everybody, to Season 4, Episode 34 of the PrimeTime Fantasy Football Podcast, where we give you our predictions, our picks, with the hopes that we help you prevail throughout Week 9 and the rest of the 2024 fantasy football season. I'm your host, Nick Giacobbe. Joining me is Nick Cap. Nick mentioned to me right before I recorded, we are actually matching shirt-wise, at least. Did not plan that, but we are in our maroon shirts for some reason.
Sure, yeah, we'll go with that.
We really should be in Yankee shirts, but don't have a lot of high hopes for that one. But anyway, welcome to the Primetime Fantasy Football Podcast. Nick, how was your football weekend?
My fantasy weekend was much better than my football weekend.
Football weekend.
My football weekend was not great. Unfortunately, my Packers did not play too well.
Yeah, they cost me money.
Yep, they won the game, but they could not cover the spread. So that's not always great.
And the Jets cost me money. You cost me money.
Me? What did I do?
You cost me money. Your teams.
My teams.
Responsibility.
I don't know, man.
That's how it works when you're a fan.
Yeah.
But that is the fun of being an NFL fan. The fun of being a fantasy fan is hopefully
that was not fun. That was not fun.
No. Hopefully in Week 9, you guys are still in it in your fantasy leagues. Our league as of last week was very, very close. The top 11 seeds all had a chance at the playoffs. I haven't looked at the standings after this week, but going into Week 8, I think there was a 6-way tie of teams that were 3 and 4, and there's one team who was 0-7 who's out of it. But every other team was in the mix, and even with losses this week, I think a lot of these teams will still be in the mix for the next couple of weeks. No, I lost in that league. I did. That was not good.
I scored 207 this week in that league. I had a great game.
Nick had a great game, and I stopped tracking. I stopped tracking points scored, in single games. But we've had some couple high. I don't know if we've gotten past 210. I would have to really look in the record books, but we've had a couple really high ones. So anyway. Welcome to the show. Welcome to the Primetime Fantasy Football Podcast. If this is the first time you're listening or watching our content, that's a pre-recorded show, not a live show. Welcome and thank you so much. This is our Tuesday show. On Tuesdays, we give you guys a waiver wire segment to kick things off. We go to our top 5 takeaways from the week from a fantasy football perspective, 5 from Nick and 5 from me. And then we've now been ending our Tuesday shows with a little trade segment, a quick trade segment, one player to trade for, one player to trade away. Got about 3 or 4-ish weeks until the trade deadline. So we want to give you guys that information. If you joined us for the live show on this past Sunday for Week 8, thank you for joining us. I shouldn't say us, I should say Nick. I was in Atlantic City and not in the state to do a show, but Nick held down the fort. Normally it will be both of us on a week-to-week basis. So again, if you're a first-time watcher, listener on the weekly content, thanks for joining the show. You get another one on Friday, and then the live show this week, as always, Week 9, 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. So like I said, we kick things off with the waiver wire segment. This segment's going to get shorter and shorter as the weeks go on, as it naturally does. But there's still some players that you should consider picking up this late in the season. So let's talk about it. We're going to give you position by position and the percentages based off of ESPN. We had to choose a system. We went with ESPN, and that's what we've been doing all season. For quarterbacks, rookie quarterback who finished in the top 5 this week, Bo Nix, had 36.7 points against the Carolina Panthers. Play your quarterbacks against the Panthers every single week. And then our guy, Jameis Winston, 3.3 fantasy points for him. So Nick, if you need to target a quarterback, maybe as a backup, maybe not, who would you go out there and target?
Jameis, I mean, we saw last year Joe Flacco went absolutely nuts with this team at the end of the year, and that was a very good roster. I'm gonna jump in
right. I want to jump in right here. Nick did tell you guys last year, if you watched or listened to the show, to pick up Flacco and play him for the playoffs. I don't want to take a dig, but Nick actually lost in our league because our opponent did exactly that. But if you listen to Nick's advice last year, you probably won yourself a fantasy football championship. And listen, Nick still won our points, which is a very prestigious honor, in my opinion, to win the points of the league. So he still won some money and still had the highest scoring team. So I give you credit for that one.
Sure, I'll take that. But listen, this roster, you would have said it was a very good offense if everyone was healthy going into the year. Well, Nick Chubb returned healthy. Amari Cooper's out of there, who's been inconsistent. And the offense the last 2 weeks looked pretty good with the different quarterbacks once Deshaun went down. Jameis had 300 yards in his first start now as a Cleveland Brown. For some perspective, Deshaun Watson has never had a 300-yard game as a Cleveland Brown. So he's got that offense rolling. We'll see if it's more of a Josh Dobbs situation where he had 2 very good games and got that offense rolling, or we'll see if it's Flacco situation where he really gets the team going for the rest of the season. But we saw it happen last year. We know the coach is very good. We know Jameis looks one direction. We warned you, it's straight down the field, and he does not care. He's going to look. Okay. They needed a field goal to win the game. And Jameis said, "Nah, my boy's down there. We're gonna go throw the ball and get this touchdown to clinch it." So it's who he is, and we love it for fantasy. We remember a few years back, he had the 30 touchdown, 30 interception season. That was a great fantasy year. Turnovers don't matter for fantasy. They do to an extent, but the touchdowns matter more. And Jameis, 300-yard game, multiple touchdowns, phenomenal game by the guy. So I'm going to ride Winston.
I got one more name that should have been on this list. It's Matthew Stafford. He's only owned in 18.5 ESPN fantasy leagues, and he's kind of gotten the short end of the stick. Nick had the Rams in his top 5 fantasy football offenses heading into the season. So the first time that Stafford's had his real full healthy offense, Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp, he had 24.7 fantasy points last week. Favorable match against Seattle this week. He might be on my all boom team. Miami, New England, Philly, some favorable matchups there. Then some tougher ones, New Orleans, Buffalo, San Francisco. Don't know what the Jets are going to be like. And then the Cardinals in your fantasy football championship. So if you're struggling at quarterback and need a backup, Stafford's another one that you can trust, and that I think you could pick up as well.
Nick and I also have not endorsed Bo Nix at any point in the season, but I do think we need to give him a little bit of love here. Over the last 3 games, he has scored over 21.7 in 3 of the 4, and he is currently the QB9 on the season. So let's give some credit where it's due to him, but I think me and Nick, we still do not trust him comfortably, even with all the success.
If I was in a 14-man league, maybe, but if you're in a 10 or a 12, I just feel like no quarterbacks gotten hurt this year, really. So I feel like you have to have a better option.
Yep.
All right. Running backs. We have 2 names here. I cannot pronounce this guy's last name. Isaac Gerendo. You might need to help me. I don't know.
Something like that. 49ers backup running back.
Yep. And then Jalen McLaughlin owned in 24% of leagues. Nick, the 49ers running back situation is a mess. McCaffrey is going to push the play next week, but Mason's kind of dinged up. We saw Gerendo involved. I'm kind of out on the 49ers running back situation. Unless you have McCaffrey, then you have to roll him out there, but I don't know.
So I will say the Niners are on bye this week. I did see that at some point, but anyway, they're on bye. So you're not going to get Gerendo for this week. So therefore I wouldn't prioritize it. I'll keep it very short and sweet. I don't think that there's a running back in the waivers right now, unless if you're in a lucky league where someone's sitting there that shouldn't be sitting there. That's worth it based off this week. I would rather use the priority on one of the quarterbacks or receiver or tight end, because tight ends had a very good.
I'm with Nick on that. We give you guys a segment every Friday. It's our deep dive waiver segment, and we give you guys, players that you should pick. We each give you one player that you should pick up before that week, so you don't have to worry about the waiver wire. So some guys that we've given you so far: Rashad White, Romeo Doubs, Demario Douglas, and last
Bucky Irving, not Rashad White.
Bucky Irving, correct. Thank you for that. And last week, me and Nick each had a Brown, and neither of us knew that we would have the Brown, but we had the Browns. So before the Browns, Gabe Davis is owned in 28.4% of leagues. He'll be filling in for Christian Kirk, who's out for the season. And now the 2 Browns are owned in less percent of leagues. So Cedric Tillman is owned in 16% of leagues, and then Elijah Moore is owned in 1.3% of leagues. Both of them had pretty good fantasy games. I had Elijah Moore. Nick had Cedric Tillman in our segment. So Nick was a bit more correct than I was. But if Jameis is going to sling the rock like this, and I'm waiver priority 9, I'm cool with getting Elijah Moore. If you're going to hit bye weeks, you're going to hit injuries, I'm cool with picking him up just to see if this trend does continue where Jameis is just going to sling the rock around and really feed these guys.
No, for sure. And we've watched a ton of receivers with Jameis, multiple on the same team, have fantasy success. We know the game script for the Browns is probably going to be favorable more often than not. The schedule is not too tough. I mean, these are my 2 priorities for the game, no doubt. I would definitely lean Cedric Tillman in this situation. That's the guy I want. Nick took a little dip, but we'll keep it rolling. Cedric Tillman's definitely the one that I want. I mean, I wanted him before the week, obviously. I had said it. And he put up a phenomenal game. His route share has been great. The way that they use him is great. He caught the touchdown at the end of the game, which gave him the massive week. But even before that, he was like 7 catches for 50, 60 yards and a touchdown. So the numbers were good before the deep touchdown. That just adds to it. So I trust Cedric Tillman at this point. I did start him in multiple leagues. The one thing I did think to myself is I've been pretty good so far in this segment where I've been 1 week early on guys. And I said, screw it. I'm just going to start them now because I don't want to be 1 week late. I'd rather be 1 week early.
Yep.
I benefited from it. But I think Cedric, we've seen 2 back-to-back very solid games from him. Very, very good games. If I read you the stat line, didn't tell you the name, you'd say he's a must start. So he's definitely, for me, waiver wire priority number 1. And then Gabe Davis, with Nick mentioned it, no Christian Kirk for the rest of the year. Brian Thomas Jr. out the next couple of weeks. We know the Jags keep getting in these favorable game scripts because their offense is not great and they're playing from behind. Jacksonville this week plays the Eagles, who do not have a very good secondary, very good defense. They're coming off a huge win with a bye. Jacksonville did come back from London. I like Gabe Davis in this spot. I don't know if he'll wind up on the old boom team because I don't know if I really want to risk it that much, but I do think that he's a very good spot start in the time that Brian Thomas Jr. misses and obviously with Kirk out for the year.
One more name here. Parker Washington, I've seen a lot of people compliment. He only had 4 targets. He caught 3 of them for 46 yards. He's also a Jaguar, so it might be a deep sleeper that you might want to take a look at. Now, I don't have his percentage, but he is not owned in leagues. You don't need that percentage.
Sure.
For tight ends, I think we spoke about K. Dotton last week, and if you missed out on the K. Dotton sweepstakes, that's a shame, especially if you needed a tight end. He's still owned in 58.6% of ESPN leagues. Who's still owned or unowned in 40% of leagues. But in your competitive leagues, he's definitely gone, and he will probably be the most targeted player outside of Mike Evans on the Tampa offense for the rest of the season. The other tight end I have here is Taysom Hill, owned in 19.5% of leagues. Came back from the injury this week. I think he had a couple receptions. If you need to play a tight end, it's worth the gamble. It really is worth the gamble.
Especially now. I mean, Carr might return from the injury this week. I saw the report. But if it is Rattler, you got to imagine Taysom Hill's going to get some reps at quarterback at some point. He's been dinged up a lot this year, so we haven't really seen a big game from Hill, but it comes in spurts.
It's coming. It'll come.
I mean, there's going to be a point where you say, oh, he's being used like a quarterback and I got a quarterback in my tight end slot. So I agree with that. And like Nick mentioned, Cade Otton, through his first few years in the league, every single year he's had the highest snap percentage at the tight end position. It's because there's really been no competition there. They've always rolled with the one tight end formation. There's never been a second one that's really backed him up. So Cade Otton will be out on that field. You can guarantee that at the tight end position. And with them being down Godwin and Evans, there's opportunity there.
3 defenses here that you could stream. The Saints at the Panthers. Who's the Saints of this week? They had
they
Chargers?
played. They got dominated. The Chargers, I want to say.
Was it the Chargers? I can't. Yeah, I just know that they look terrible. So I think the Saints are probably on a lot of waiver wires. I'm sure the Commanders are on a lot of waiver wires as well at the Giants. And the Titans are hosting New England. They faced Buffalo, and then yesterday they faced the Lions. So I doubt people are keeping the Titans defense. So these are the 3 defenses that should be very streamable and do have very favorable matchups. The Titans have been good against basically every fantasy football position through the year, unless you're facing the number 1 offense in the league who scored 130 points since October 10th, the Lions. The Commanders had a good performance against the Giants week 2, and the Commanders have been sneaky good on defense the last 2 weeks. They really weren't for most of the season, but they shut down the Panthers, and they really shut down the Bears too, where the Bears shut themselves down. And then the Saints obliterated the Panthers week 1. It could have been a shutout. If the players got paid for a shutout, that they would have shut them out, but they got pulled at halftime. I'm not sure about the status of Andy Dalton, but I guess Bryce Young will probably start next week. So I don't know if you prefer any of these, Nick. If Bryce is starting, I want the Saints defense, but I'm fine with any of the 3, honestly.
I agree with that, especially if Carolina's is dinged up. No Deontay, no Thielen. They didn't have them this week. So if that's the situation, the Saints are definitely the number 1 ad. And then I do like the Titans. The Titans offense the last 2 weeks, or defense, horrible. The Detroit Lions and the Buffalo Bills, two of the league's best offenses. The Patriots are not that. I mean,
Nope.
they're coming off their best offensive game of the season. There is no way that they're going to keep that pace up. And if Drake May is out with a concussion and it is Jacoby Brissett, then it's 100% a must start.
Yep. All right, we're going to move on to our top 5 takeaways from Week 8 from a fantasy football perspective. These takeaways are not ordered. They're just 5 things that we've taken away from the week. So, Nick, what is your first takeaway? I know 2 of Nick's takeaways, by the way. Nick does not know any of mine. So,
sure.
What is your first takeaway?
So I want to talk a little bit about the Lions. I talked about them last week. Nick and I have talked about them just about every week because this offense is elite. And they just proved once again that it does not matter what defense is on the other side of the ball. They're going to obliterate them. I know people don't like the Tennessee Titans. Well, they've been a top 5 team against quarterbacks, running backs, and wide receivers through the season. They are not that anymore, and that is purely because of this game to the Detroit Lions. The Lions have 25 total touchdowns in the last 5 games. Jared Goff has 18 incompletions in those 5 games. Jared Goff has been an elite quarterback. He did not have to throw much. I believe he had 80 yards for 3 touchdowns in this game. Kind of crazy. Ben Johnson, we thought, maybe he should have taken a head coaching job. Yeah, he still looks like the best head coaching candidate from all the coordinators that are out there. This offense is so creative in different ways. Again, everybody found a way to eat in a game where this team went off. Gibbs, touchdown. Monty, passing and rushing touchdown for him. Laporta, touchdown. Amon-Ra, rough game in the receiving game because they didn't need to pass the ball, touchdown. Khalif Raymond, touchdown. Brock Wright, touchdown. This team was automatic this week, and they tend to be it more often than not. And again, like I said, the Titans, they're not some Joe Schmo defense that you walk over. And the schedule, it's pretty good. They got most dome games, and they're going to get matchups to the Packers, which should be a shootout. The Texans, which we think will be a shootout. The Jags, a very easy defense. The Colts, a very easy defense. And Buffalo. Buffalo keeps allowing a ton of points to these elite offenses. I like this spot for the Detroit Lions. Nick and I both had him as one of the top. I believe we both had him in the top 3 for offenses that we wanted a piece of this season, and everybody is hitting on all cylinders. I mean, it's truly fantastic. I don't think we've ever seen an NFL offense keep up to this standard for the entire course of the season. We'd love to see it. Maybe the Patriots in that undefeated year and the Peyton Manning MVP Broncos, but outside of that, there really has not been an offense to sustain this much greatness all around the board.
So my first point is that, Nick, we got to mark this down on our calendar next year for the all boom teams. Happy National Tight End Day, because just about every tight end boomed, and it just needs to be mentioned. 18 tight ends went into double digits, and that could happen some weeks, but it was the big names that really dominated the double digits, and the reason you drafted some of these guys. 8 tight ends had 15 plus fantasy points. Kelsey, Laporta, Andrews, McBride, probably your top 4 tight ends off the board, all within the top 11. Even here, Kyle Pitts is tight end too. Like, he's another one that I just totally left Kittle off that list. Kittle and other. So your top 5 here: K-Dot, Kyle Pitts, Travis Kelsey, George Kittle, Trey McBride. One of those is not like the other, and that's okay. But basically, if you played a tight end this week, you probably got a good number of points, unless you're like me and played Jake Ferguson. And Nick, I'm just going to steal it right here. I'm going to go to my next point. The Cowboys offense and team is so bad, and they're not getting enough hate, like criticism. I don't know what word we want to use, but the media, at least in my opinion, and just normal NFL fans, are really not talking about how bad the Cowboys have been this year. They were the number 1 offense in the league last year. Number 2, them and the Dolphins are neck and neck, scored a lot of points. They're just not that this year. So Dak Prescott alone is 9th in passing yards and 13th in touchdowns. It's not the worst thing in the world, but that's a pretty significant drop off. As for the other players, Jake Ferguson only has 3 games over double digits, 3 under. That's fine, but he's not a go-to guy. Clearly not a set it and quit it. There is no second wide receiver. Tolbert was fun for a week or 2, but he's flamed out. Yep. And then just as we thought that Rico Dowdle was getting some love and was going to become, a solid like running back 2 or flex in your lineup, here comes Ezekiel Elliott barging into Jerry's office and being like, "What's going on here? I'm the goal line back. That's why you signed me." And then Jerry's like, "Well, Zeke, I love you, drafted you. You're gonna get the goal line work." So Rico was out this week, and it was Zeke and Dalvin Cook. Zeke is gonna get all the goal line work, but not enough work to justify putting him in your lineup. It's It's a mess. So the only Cowboy you could comfortably play is CeeDee Lamb. Dak's been okay, I guess. So Dak maybe, but depending on your quarterback situation. But from a skill position standpoint, it is CeeDee Lamb and the rest. And even CeeDee Lamb through 8 weeks is only sitting at the wide receiver. Let me pull it up. He might have cracked the top 10 at this point.
I mean, that was a huge game. He might have got there.
Wide receiver 4. So we already had his bye. I mean, the week was so before this week, I think he was wide receiver 8 or 9. So he does have some making up to do in terms of the ADP. He will pass Chris Godwin, who's not going to play again this season. So your top 3 are Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, and CeeDee Lamb, exactly how most of us did predict it. So anyway, I just jumped on my second take. So Nick, what is your second take?
So let's talk a little bit about another NFC offense. This one, similar to the Cowboys missing pieces this game, but this team figured out how to be fantasy productive. And we talked about a couple of their players earlier. Let's talk about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. No Mike Evans, no Chris Godwin. Auden, absolute star, 9 catches on 10 targets, 81 yards, 2 touchdowns. They had 6 players get over 5 targets in this game. Baker had 330 yards, 3 touchdowns, 74%. So Baker, anyone that was concerned about the weapons not being there, well, he shut down all that concern. Bucky Irving looked really, really good. He got a ton of he led the team in touches, led the running back room in catches and in targets. So those two, they got to be locked into your lineup, and they're going to get a little bit more tested these next 2 weeks. They're going to get Kansas City and San Francisco. But after that, here's how they close out the season. Giants, Panthers, Raiders, Chargers a little bit tough there. Cowboys, Panthers, good rest of the season. Baker, he's probably the steal of the waiver wire at the quarterback position. Let's see where he ranks on the season. I mean, he's got to be top. He's number 2 on the year. So he's having
he has not had his bye, but neither is Jaden Daniels, who's sitting at 3, and neither is Josh Allen, who's sitting at 4. So all these top quarterbacks have not had their buys yet, actually. So
yeah, it's only Jalen Hurts.
Hurts is the earliest one with his bye. Hurts average is pretty high though, at 21.6, third highest average. So
yeah, Baker's still at 24.2 average. So he's balling out. Period.
Yep.
End of story. And good for him. I do want to know what happens with this wide receiver room. It's going to be a big question for next week. We saw all 3 of those guys, Palmer, Shepard, and McMillan, get picked up in a ton of leagues, and it looks like that they were leaning on Rachaad White, Bucky Irving, and Cade Otton more often. I don't think that's always going to be the case for this team, so I still want a piece of that offense. I just don't know yet which one is going to be the one that supersedes the rest. So if they're on your bench after this week, if you are someone, I'm not cutting them immediately. I still want to stash them for another week or 2, because that schedule, when it does open up, that's a big opportunity to replace Chris Godwin.
I wanted to jump in there because you mentioned the guy that I'm about to talk about, and that's Jalen Hurts. And when it comes to Jalen Hurts, when it comes to Nick Sirianni, respectfully, F the tush push, because I am a Saquon Barkley owner, and a lot of people are Saquon Barkley owners. A lot of people are betting Saquon anytime touchdowns. And then this guy runs for 57 yards on the final drive, including the final drive the Stars were in, including a 17-yard run down to the 1-yard line. And then they go tush push.
Yep.
That is disrespectful. You're up 2 scores. Saquon hasn't gotten in the end zone. Hurts has already gotten his. That's disrespectful.
The right decision.
No, it's not. Give him one run. Just one. One handoff.
You can't. It works.
No,
you can't.
It's disrespectful.
I don't.
You know what Saquon got? You know what Saquon got? Did you watch this? Saquon got to spike the ball. He didn't get the touchdown, but he got to spike the ball. So congrats
I didn't
on
see that. That's
yes,
awesome.
I know because a buddy of mine lost an $1,000 parlay on Saquon not getting the touchdown.
Oh my God.
That's the out of 6 guys, it's the only one that didn't hit.
Damn.
So Saquon looks good, 108 yards, but only 1 reception for 3 yards. But he finishes as running back 23 with only 12.1 fantasy points because of the lack of receptions and lack of touchdown. And again, as a Saquon owner, F the tush push. Give him a carry on the 1. You're up 14 points. And on that final drive, Saquon had 57 yards. I don't know how long the drive was. It was like 70-ish yards. He had 57 of them. You're telling me you can't reward the guy. You're up 2 scores.
Here's where I wanna because I don't disagree. I am a Saquon owner as well, though I do own Hurts in 2 leagues.
But even if you don't Saquon, that's a bit disrespectful to your back that just got you down. You're up 2 scores. You don't give him one. If you give him one carry to get stuff, they get it. But you didn't give him one carry.
Well, here's why I will push back against it. They've been successful on it like 85-90% of the time that they do it. And you don't want to do 4 plays where the offensive line is pushing the defensive line because you risk the injury to one of your top offensive linemen. So I don't blame them. But it was also built into both their ADP. It's why we built Jalen Hurts up. Nick and I both thought Jalen Hurts would finish the season as the QB1. He has an opportunity to still do that. It's going to be tough to catch Lamar, but I mean, he's been on a tremendous pace over the course of the year, already passed his bye, and it was built into Saquon Barkley's ADP. He was being drafted outside the first round because of that, even though Nick and I both said the Eagles would be the best offense for fantasy. So I agree with you in some aspects, but we always knew that there were going to be weeks where he could not find the end zone, and it's annoying on that week, but over the course of the season, it pans out for him. So I will push back a little bit there.
All right, this is your take number 3. I think it's 3.
Yep. So I'm going to talk about the Cleveland Browns offense. We talked a lot about them in the A block of the show, so I'll try to keep it a little bit more succinct, but Jameis was great. The receivers had back-to-back great games with him. A bunch of guys found success. He had the most passing yards of any quarterback this week. He had 3 passing touchdowns. Nick Chubb got 16 carries, which was good to note. But the story of the game was the wide receivers. Cedric Tillman, talked about him earlier, 7 catches on 9 targets, 99 yards. 2 touchdowns, currently the wide receiver 3 on the week before Monday Night Football. Nick gave you Elijah Moore, 8 catches on 12 targets, 85 yards. Jerry Jeudy had a very good day. David Njoku had a very strong game and a touchdown. And listen, it happened against the Ravens. The Ravens have not been great against the wide receiver position this year, but this is a very solid team, and they were a bottom 5 offense with Deshaun Watson and Amari Cooper. They did not have Cooper Kupp. They changed the play caller on offense this week. So, and we did watch last year. We watched Joe Flacco with this team cook for fantasy. We watched those receivers. We watched Amari Cooper have days. We watched Elijah Moore be somewhat relevant. We watched Jerome Ford be good. We watched David Njoku be the tight end 1 from week 7 on. It worked for this team. It worked for Joe Flacco. Jameis Winston is a guy that is great for fantasy football, and the Browns offense is something to be excited about as of this point in the year.
All right, so my 4th takeaway here is that Mason Rudolph is making Calvin Ridley playable on an every week basis. With Will Levis, Calvin Ridley was super duper talented, but if you watch every single target, even when he's open, the ball's just nowhere close to him. 5 games without Mason Rudolph with Will Levis. He only averaged 7.9 points a game. He had a couple games under 3 targets, so he wasn't even getting targeted in some of these games. Now, with Mason Rudolph, it is a little bit of a small sample size, only over 2 weeks. His average is 14.9. He had about 7 points last week and 22 this week. But he has 9+ targets in each game. So that means that Rudolph is going to continue to feed him. Rudolph's just a better pro than Levis is. And all he really has to do is just let Pollard cook, let Ridley cook. Just sit there and let your playmakers play and get the ball in your playmakers' hands. Don't get the ball to the opposing team. And I think Mason Rudolph is an upgrade for the Titans. And I hope that Will Levis does not start another game. And the thing is, I have no stock in the Titans. I don't have the defense. I don't have Pollard. I would like Pollard. I don't have Ridley. So I don't even have stock in them. But from a fantasy standpoint, from a show standpoint, I do hope that Rudolph continues to play as he is better for the fantasy football community.
Sure.
Take number 4.
All right, you talked a little bit about you talked about tight end university this week, tight end week, and yes, we are going to mark our calendars for week 9 next year because every year these tight ends score a ton of touchdowns on this day. But there's one tight end in the last few weeks that everybody in the fantasy community took a massive dump on. Not the Laporta potty, someone that everybody has hated up to this point of the year, is under-delivered on ADP, that is working their way back. Mark Andrews. Right now, he is the tight end 11, and this came off where he had back-to-back games with a goose egg. He had no games over 10 points through like 4 weeks, but through the last 3 weeks of the season, he's the tight end 3. He's averaging 16.8 points per game, and something that kind of got overlooked and I think was a piece of this, he got in that car accident before the year. The team said he's totally fine, he's totally okay. I don't think he was, because when you look at the snap share splits, he was getting such a little portion of the workload and such a little portion of being out on the field. And now he's getting out on the field more. So I think that he was just still recovering. Maybe it was a mental block, whatever it was. But now they put him out there. So my thought is I think Mark Andrews is going to continue this momentum for the rest of the season. I think the Ravens offense has clearly shown to be very, very good. Yes, they did get upset by the Browns this week, but Mark Andrews has been so reliable for fantasy for so many consecutive years that, yeah, there was a 3-4 game skid at the start of the year. Well, he's fully bounced back. I mean, 3 straight games of being a top 3 tight end. He scored double-digit fantasy points in, let's take a quick look. Double-digit fantasy points in those last 3 games of the last 4, minimum 9.5 points. These last 3 games all scored over 14.5 points. So consistency's been there, upside's been there. I mean, we know he's a must-start at this point, but I didn't put him in the trade for candidate section. I think he probably is a good trade for because people are still a little skeptical after that start of the year.
My 5th takeaway, we could not get through this show without talking Jets football.
Oh, come on. Yes, we could.
No,
we totally could.
No, because this is a positive takeaway from the Jets. Listen, the Jets are underperforming as a team. I said to Nick before the show, the worst loss in Nick's lifetime as a Jet. Adams is a ghost, but Garrett Wilson is not a ghost. If you have Garrett Wilson, he's been great. He's the wide receiver 6, and I knocked him in this segment I think a couple weeks ago, or maybe it was the boom and bust. I think it was this segment because through his first 4 or 5 weeks, he was getting targets but couldn't notch over 60 yards and hadn't found the end zone yet. In his last 4 games, he's averaging 20.8 fantasy points. He's 8+ targets in all 4 games, and he's 100 yards in 3 out of those 4 games. 2 of those are with Davante Adams. I think we were very worried about the Davante Adams intrusion into the offense. I think Davante's washed. I don't think that's an understatement. And Nick's been on that take for like 2 or 3 years at this point.
No. He's a great receiver, and I love him, and he's been my favorite guy.
You know what, Nick? That is karma for all the anti-Davante Adams takes that you've had on this show. But I think Garrett Wilson is that dude on that team, and maybe we could actually credit Davante for helping the stat line for Garrett Wilson. Maybe the fact that they have Davante over there.
He was getting double teamed all game. Davante.
And I don't see how you double team either of these guys. They're both too talented. I'm joking a bit with Davante. I don't know what's going on with the Jets. I really don't. Like I have bet the Jets 3 weeks in a row now. I have said all 3 are must wins, and they were going to win. So I am not anti-Jets. I am just watching the game and watching just like I can't wait. Well, I can't wait because as a sports fan, I want to know the details. But I can't wait for the Athletic article that's going to come out in March about what's going on with this team because there's too much talent. It doesn't make sense, but I hope this trend continues for Garrett Wilson. I'm a Garrett Wilson owner in a league that I do have to make up some ground in. And he's been helping me these last few weeks. So I do hope that whatever is working, whether it's chemistry or Rodgers, whether it's, Devontae. My dog was just snoring super loud. Whether it's Davante Adams, taking double teams or, maybe they were doubling Garrett before and now they can't. Whatever it is, it's working, and I'm happy about that for my fantasy team. And your Jets players are still very, very playable. Not Aaron Rodgers; he should not be owned in any fantasy leagues. But your skill position players are very playable.
I like my Jets, and I wish our field goal kicker could make some kicks.
I had that field goal kicker in like 2 of my leagues up until this week, and I dropped it.
Yeah, at least you were smart enough to drop him in football. But meanwhile, my organization, for some reason, he's still on our roster. By the way, I don't want to get into the full football take because this is a fantasy football show. But Greg Zuerlein has a worse kicking field goal percentage than Aaron Rodgers has a completion percentage. Just so you know, he's the only kicker in the league to have a worse field goal percentage than their starting quarterback, including. So I don't know. It's horrible. He's missed 4 kicks in the last 5 weeks that would have put them in the lead in the fourth quarter, including multiple PATs. Not going to get fully into it because again.
So here's the fantasy takeaway from that. I drafted Zuerlein or picked him up or whatever because I thought the Jets are going to kick a lot of field goals. They're either going to score a lot of points or they'll get down to the red zone and stall. And they're going to play defense and they're going to try to win games and they'll kick a lot of field goals. It's the same. it's the Seattle mindset. I used to always draft Seattle's kickers, Hausch Money, who was a very good kicker for the Seahawks, because the Seahawks would play defense and they'd kick a lot of field goals. And I thought the Jets could be that. So there actually is a fantasy bow towards Zerline, and he should be dropped in all of your fantasy football leagues because there has to be a better kicker out there for you.
The only upside for it would be the Jets then say they don't want to take field goals and they will go for it more on fourth down, which is more touchdown upside.
Well, they're going to sign another kicker at some point, I think.
Yeah, that's what I would think, but they haven't done it yet. So
where's Hot Rod? Hot Rod's out there somewhere.
There's got to be someone better.
All right.
Anyway,
your fifth takeaway.
All right, different AFC East team. We got to talk the Miami Dolphins because Nick and I have told the story of the Miami Dolphins on this show from week 1 to here with the Tua injury, me being all over Achane, Tyreek Hill being so hyped up, Jalen Waddle having a lot of hype going into the season. I mean, this show has really, there's teams that we focus on and talk a lot. There's Jets, Bengals, Browns, Dolphins. These are four teams that like the Lions. These are five, and the Eagles. Those are like
the Bucks. We got a lot of Bucks.
The Falcons are earning a spot. I mean, these are teams we talk. Green Bay. Those are like teams we constantly talk about because they need to be talked about. And the Dolphins actually shift their momentum this week. Based on, and Nick and I have said it. We thought that once Tua came back, this offense would look better. So let's get into it. And the first person we got to talk about is my guy Devon Achane, because we saw again another fantastic game with Tua at the quarterback. Week 1 with Tua, 23 points. Week 2 with Tua, 29.5 points. RB2 and 3 on each of those weeks. 14 catches through those 2 games. And this week, his third game with Devon Achane, with Tua at quarterback, 26.7, 97 rushing yards, 8 targets in this game. He's on pace, by the way, right now with Tua as the starting quarterback for 125 targets this season. Just so you know how many receivers get that, it's less than 10 over the course of the year. So he is on tremendous pace as a running back. He's on Christian McCaffrey numbers and tempo, and that's what you get when you're in this Shanahan system. And it's great. It's great for him. It's great for fantasy. They did not win the game because, in typical Dolphins and Jets fashion, and anyone really outside New England, they find a way to lose these games.
The Cardinals, they're bad. They've been bad.
And they're the 1 seed in your division, by the way. There's a 3-way tie.
Well, that's because my Seahawks are just the Seahawks are. They're not a Pete Carroll Seahawks team anymore.
No, definitely not. But
I will say this: a Pete Carroll Seahawks team that plays that Bills team yesterday keeps it a 1-score game 9 out of 10 games because Pete Carroll teams played up the competition. Didn't mean to interrupt your take, but
no, for sure. And I think for on the Seattle part of it is they did up the tempo, and with that comes some of those worse games, some of those better games.
Yep. I'm not upset about it. I'm not upset about it.
You have a more entertaining game to watch on Sundays, I would say, with this new offense. So,
Correct.
Anyways, back to the Miami Dolphins. So something that's important to note, I did not like the Dolphins because I did not like the back half of their schedule. Well, a lot of the defenses that they play on the back half have totally flipped. Like before the season, they were projected top 5 defenses. Here's their playoff schedule, and all these teams allow top 10 points per game to the wide receiver position. Houston Texans, San Francisco 49ers, Cleveland Browns. Those are 3 defenses that, again, huge expectations going into the year, lackluster on this through the actual season. So that's why it's kind of hard to predict defenses, but you're going to get Tyreek Hill, who had 9 targets, 6 catches, 72 yards, one of his best games since the Tua injury, get some of these easier scheduled games in the back half of the year.
All right. So we're going to now move on to our trade bait segment, quick segment to end the show and get out of here. Me and Nick are each going to give you quick hitter, 1 player to trade for, and then 1 player to trade away. So why don't we start with Nick? Who do you want to trade for before the trade deadline?
There is a reason I left Tua at the back half, and it's because I want to trade for Jalen Waddle. He has been horrendous fantasy-wise this year. He has 6 straight games under 10 fantasy points, 2 of those with Tua, and it's been a very rough year. But let's not forget who Jalen Waddle is. Jalen Waddle, through his first 3 years in the league, was the wide receiver 13-8, got injured last year, and finished as the wide receiver 34. The team right now, based off all the stats that you've seen, ranks 25th in offense, 25th in pass attempts, 32nd in passing touchdowns, 30th in red zone. This was a top 5 offense in football last year, the top 2 offense in football last year. I don't think they're going to get there, but they're not going to be a bottom 5 offense for the rest of the season. They are going to be somewhere in the middle to top half. If you started the season today, from then on, they are a top 16 offense. There is no way around it. Jalen Waddle is so tremendously undervalued right now based off what what we've seen. And like I mentioned when I was talking about Tyreek Hill, that playoff schedule is so favorable. 3 games against teams that allow top 10 points per game to the wide receiver position. It is a massive trade for candidate, and he has the name value, but anyone that's played him in fantasy has not been happy. I guarantee you can get him for a lot less than you think.
I'm going with Mike Evans here, a guy who's injured, going to be out a couple weeks. He's going to be out for Kansas City, going to be out for San Francisco, avoid the really tough matchups, and most likely return after the bye for week 13. I like Mike Evans as a trade for candidate if you are, week 9? So if you're 8-1, 7-2, 6-3. If you're anything above 500 and you think you have the depth for it, I would take Mike Evans and stash him on your bench, and here's why. There is no Chris Godwin. So there is nobody to steal targets from him. And when he does come back, Baker already has the chemistry with Mike Evans. This isn't something that you're going to have to retool. He already has the chemistry with Mike Evans. Was very good this season up until the injury in the matchup against the Saints. On top of that, Baker is second in yards and first in touchdowns. And like Nick stated earlier in the show, that didn't change against the Falcons. And the Falcons are a pretty good defense. Judon and AJ Terrell, like they've revamped their defense. Baker was throwing all over them. And then Nick also mentioned the playoff schedule for Baker and the Bucks. In December on, they have the Panthers, the Raiders, the Chargers, the Cowboys, and then the Panthers. There is no Saints on that schedule for Mike Evans. The Saints are the last week. So maybe if your championship is week 18 or 19, whatever the last week of the season is at this point, maybe you don't do this trade because you don't want him in the championship week. But I would do this trade to get somebody on your roster. He's gonna have the Panthers twice. They're terrible. He's going to have the Panthers twice. And the Raiders. The Raiders are terrible. The Chargers will play tough enough, but I'm sure they'll be injured and out of it. The Cowboys look horrendous on top of horrendous. I see a lot of positives for Mike Evans, so I would go make that trade if you can. And who are you trading away?
I'm getting rid of Ramondre Stevenson. He is coming off a massive game against the New York Jets. The first time he played them, he had 0.3 points. This past game, he had, I think, his best game of the year with over or around 20. I know he had 2 touchdowns in the game, but that's an outlier for this team. He has been way too boom bust. Right now, he has scored a total of 5 touchdowns on the year. He has 4 games over 17 points. The problem isn't those games. The problem is the other half of the games, because in those games, the other 3 he has played in, he has under 8 points in all of those ones, and he's coming off a high. I want to sell him off a high. 5 touchdowns for running back on this team. It's not going to sustain. He is not going to pace out, and he would pace out a 14, 15 touchdowns year. That's not going to happen for this guy. I mean, this offense is just not that good, and maybe with Drake May, they are better, but Drake May has been passing the ball more, and Ramondre has not been efficient enough on the ground. We already saw the team say that they're willing to transfer the starting role over to Gibson with the fumbling issue, and now you have an inefficiency issue. In the last 6 games that Ramondre has played, he only has 1 game over 4 yards per carry, and half of those games are under 3 yards per carry. Right now, he ranks as the RB22. I'm sure a lot of people see that and see value in that and think that this Patriots offense is going to get better. I don't think it's going to happen. I would totally shift. And here's 2 running backs that are in the same range that I would rather have: Tony Pollard, James Conner. Both these guys, a lot more consistent with their numbers. They don't have that ceiling that Ramondre has hit as often, but both of them get work in the passing game. Both of them get work in the rushing game. Both of them have been a lot more consistent. And when you start Ramondre is currently a running back 2 for your team. If you have Ramondre Stevenson, he's probably not your 1. When you have an RB2, you need a locked and loaded 10 to 15 points. That's exactly how you need to construct your roster. It's a lot better to do it with Tony Pollard or James Conner, who will give you that safe floor so your wide receivers can go out and win you the week.
I am trading away DJ Moore. We put him on our all boom team in back-to-back weeks. Nick did, then I did, and he did not boom either of those weeks. The Bears schedule gets really, really tough. They're going to have 5 divisional matchups before week 17. The Packers twice, I think the Lions twice, and I think the Vikings once. That's really tough. DJ Moore is under 6 fantasy points in each of the last 2 weeks. And the thing that concerns me is those are supposed to be positive matchups. So if he's not putting up numbers in those positive matchups, then what's going to happen when he has those negative matchups later on in the season? My biggest concern is the coaching. Eberflus is bad. I don't even know who the OC is, but the Bears should have won that game on Sunday. The coaching, they may have the worst coaching in the league because of how talented that team is. The defense is really talented. The offense has a lot of pieces besides the terrible offensive line. but the coaching is really bad, and I personally don't want a piece of that Bears offense. So I chose to pick the most valuable piece of that Bears offense. And if you could trade DJ Moore for Mike Evans, I would do that right now. Actually, I'd rather have Mike Evans for the rest of the season.
I'd do that too.
All right, so that is our Tuesday show heading into week 9, a full waiver wire, trade for candidates, and then our top 5 takeaways. So if you're listening and watching on YouTube, make sure to drop a like on this video and subscribe to the channel if you already haven't. Hit that bell icon so you get notifications every time we go live or upload a new video. We'll have a new one, a new show this Thursday or Friday. We alternate, depends on the week, but we'll have another one for you guys later this week. Also available on all audio streaming platforms. If you're on iTunes or Spotify, please give us a 5-star rating and a review. We're also on all social media platforms. We're on Instagram, it's Primetime Fantasy Football Podcast. Twitter is Primetime FF Pod. If you have any questions during the week when we don't have a live show, make sure to ask us on those platforms. We'll be happy to get to your questions. All right, guys, that is our show. Make sure to set your waiver wires before 3 a.m., and we'll talk to you guys later this week.